Um, so now we're going to hear from Gregg Tully. Gregg's the country director of Save the Dogs and Other Animals, where he's internationalizing the organization and managing its response to the crisis in Ukraine. After earning a Ph.D. in biology, he went to Nepal as an acting executive director of the Kathmandu Animal Treatment Center, as the CEO of the Soy Dog Foundation, the largest animal protection organization in Southeast Asia. He led it through a phase of rapid growth, then became the CEO of PASA, the largest association of wildlife centers in Africa, which expanded from a staff of 1 to a staff of 8 with 40 volunteers. So a huge international experience, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to the Animals at War conference, Gregg. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just give me a moment to share my screen. All right. If you can't see that, someone let me know. Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm Gregg Tully, and as Mark said, I'll be talking about internationalizing Save the Dogs and also managing its response to the crisis in Ukraine. So first, I'll give you a little history of Save the Dogs. The full name is Save the Dogs and Other Animals. It was founded 20 years ago in Romania, where there's been a huge stray dog problem for a long time. And one of the peaks of this stray dog crisis was around 2001, 2002, when Sara Tiretta from Italy went to Romania and started working on this issue and founded the organization. So the aim was to tackle this widespread stray dog problem. And the first projects were, massive dog sterilizations, both at a stationary veterinary clinic and also using a mobile clinic, a vehicle outfitted for doing surgeries in rural southeast Romania, where the dog problem was especially severe. And this is actually fairly close to Ukraine. And they also opened an office in Milan for communications and fundraising. So over the years, the organization grew, and the programs in Southeast Romania expanded to include, education for both children and adults, advocacy and activism, pressuring the government about legislation, rescue and care for horses and donkeys, as well as cats and dogs, because they're in this rural area, a lot of, sadly, when horses and donkeys that are used for farming get sick, it's often cheaper just to buy a new one than to take them to a vet and pay for vet care. So there's a serious problem of these animals being abandoned because it's just providing good care for them is simply too expensive for a lot of people in their perspective. And also adoptions. After taking in all these animals, they need to go somewhere. And so, some of them are returned to their own neighborhoods, but a lot of them are adopted out to especially to Germany and Sweden and Italy. So as the organization continued to grow, in 2019, Save the Dogs started programs to help dogs in Italy, both in Milan, helping people suffering from homelessness to stay with their animals, and also in southern Italy, where there's a stray dog problem. So it's now become a leading animal protection organization in Romania. We have about 50 employees here in Romania and 17 in Italy. But for most of the organization's history, it was really the programs were largely in Romania, and the communication was largely focused on Italian-speaking audiences in Italy. Secondarily, there's also communication to English-speaking audiences elsewhere in Europe. And as I said, until just a few years ago, all of the programs were in Romania. So I joined Save the Dogs on March 1st, which is just days after the crisis in Ukraine began, which was, in a strange way, it was actually really fortunate timing that I was here to be able to help out with this. And it was clear that it was time to internationalize the organization. Instead of being focused on two countries, to really leverage these successful programs and the organization's impact and become a global organization. This includes expanding the communications and the fundraising worldwide, as well as in Romania. To date, very little of our public communications have been focused in Romania, even though most of our work is here. And so that's clearly an opportunity. And because of the crisis in Ukraine, that became a third focal country for us, in addition to Italy and Romania. So let's talk about Ukraine. The war continues to be a severe threat for the citizens and the animals of Ukraine. There are still sporadic missile strikes on various cities throughout the country, which is, still forces people to live in fear. Prevents people from returning to their normal lives. A lot of people haven't worked since the crisis began, and the economy is still in a shambles in a lot of Ukraine. Our partners in the Kharkiv area and in Mykolaiv are constantly in fear of the Russian shelling. It's as you know, it's still, even though it's not really prominent in the news in the Western world the way it was months ago, it's still an absolute crisis. Just a few days ago, drone strikes in Odessa were causing widespread chaos and fear and destruction. So more than 12 million Ukrainian people have been displaced by this. And some of them have been able to bring their family animals with them, but a lot of people were forced to leave their animals behind. And this has created a crisis of abandoned pets who are just roaming the streets. These aren't street dogs that have been living on the streets and have street smarts. They're just abandoned pets who have no survival skills. And this has put a huge burden on the animal shelters across Ukraine, as well as the people as individuals who are taking care of these animals. There are now more companion animals on the streets of Ukraine than ever before in history. And because a lot of Ukrainian men have been drafted or involved in the war effort, so most of the people who are taking care of these abandoned animals are women and children and the elderly. And as I said, a lot of them haven't earned money since the crisis began, but despite that, they're out there risking their lives every day to feed and take care of these animals. It's truly inspiring. So these are just a couple photos that our partners in Kharkiv sent us last week, showing that the destruction is still ongoing. Here's another one. There is some positive news about some of the areas that Save the Dogs is focusing on. Just this month, the Ukrainian army has made significant advances in the areas of Kharkiv and in Mykolaiv. So this is enabling our partners to more safely take care of animals. So what is Save the Dogs doing about Ukraine? The first thing is feeding starving dogs and cats. We've now sent 244 tons of dog and cat food to various locations across southern and northeastern Ukraine. We're sending, thanks to our very generous supporters and partners, we're sending 20 tons, so a truck full of food every 2 weeks. And this is going to more than 30 direct partners that we have, and then they distribute it onward further to more than 20 animal shelters, 400 volunteers who are just feeding animals on the streets. And this is keeping close to 4,000 cats and more than 4,000 dogs alive. And we're also donating pet food to the military. The Ukrainian military has made huge efforts to really look out for the local dogs, and so it's good that we can support them as well by contributing pet food. So how are we doing this? Well, we have a good relationship with a Romanian pet food manufacturer, and they're able to consistently provide us with large quantities of food, and the dogs and cats like it. It's palatable to them. We also work with a transportation company that employs Ukrainian drivers who have permits to travel between Ukraine and Romania, and they know the areas well. And so we've developed a good system for efficiently transporting pet food to our partners. Our main partner is the manager of an animal shelter in Odessa, and she's been absolutely amazing. She rents a storage space where the pet food is delivered, and so that the trucks go there first, they drop off the food in the storage space, and she works with us to organize distributing the food to other animal shelters and volunteers. And we're in touch with her every day, and she accounts for the quantities of food and coordinates with the drivers who not just bring the food from Romania, but also transporting it to northeastern parts of Ukraine. And we coordinate with her to make sure that everyone gets the right amount of food and it's all divided up appropriately. And and then once those partners receive the food, they share it with other animal shelters. And some of these animal shelters are, organizations with staff. Some of them are just sort of people in their backyards who have, some dogs or cats or a mix, and a lot of them are severely overcrowded because of the animals abandoned by the war. But through these networks, we're able to distribute the food and really amplify our impact. Sadly, it's just not enough. I mean, despite the tons and tons of food that a number of organizations, including Save the Dogs, are sending to Ukraine, it's still not enough. This picture here shows from Kharkiv recently, people were lining up just to get a bag with a couple kilos of dog food or cat food. So there's still much more that needs to be done. And this map shows in purple the areas where we're working. So Romania is kind of in the lower left, and there's a little green marker for Save the Dogs. Our animal shelter is just 2.5 hours from the Ukrainian border, which puts us in a terrific position for acting as a staging area and coordinating this distribution of supplies. And those purple areas show where we've been delivering food to get all these various partners and volunteers and animal shelters. Another way that we've been working on this crisis is helping refugees to stay with their pets. I said there were 12 million displaced people. I mean, 5 million of those are refugees who have actually left Ukraine. And a lot of them have crossed into Romania at the Isacha border crossing, which is the southern border crossing between Romania and Ukraine. And I mentioned the draft before, but Ukrainian men are generally not allowed to leave the country unless they have special permission, for example, because of their job. So that means that most of the refugees are women and children and the elderly. And in most cases, they just brought with them whatever they could carry. And some of them were able to bring their companion animals. And it was really heartbreaking seeing people just with a small dog or a cat just walking with the animal in their arms or sort of tucked into their jacket to protect the animal from the cold. But a lot of these people didn't have even leashes or collars or, never mind pet food. So for more than 4 months, we had staff and volunteers posted at the Isacha border crossing every day. And they, helping these refugees, altogether they helped more than 1,000 refugees animals to stay with their families. The biggest need was for pet carriers because people were traveling by land into Romania because obviously there are no commercial flights, but many people want to travel onward from Romania to other countries, either by plane or by train, and it's required to have a proper pet carrier to be able to do that. And some of the refugees didn't know about this, some just didn't have a carrier. So we donated more than 500 pet carriers and thousands of other items, collars, leashes, dog jackets, little packets of pet food that were easy to travel with. And also a really important part of this was just giving people emotional support. We had a tent at the border and a place where people could just sit and relax and charge their phone, call their families. And that was, I can't say enough about how important that was as well for people. A third area that we've been working is rescuing dogs from Ukraine and providing long-term care for them. In the first month of the crisis, one of our partner shelters in Odessa named Loving Hearts Shelter was damaged by a Russian military strike. And this damaged some of their facilities. And as a result, they weren't able to provide for all of the dogs in their care. They had 180 dogs at that time. And so the shelter manager contacted me and begged us to accept some of their dogs so that they could, provide adequate care for the remaining ones. So we agreed to transfer 30 of the dogs to our shelter, which was the biggest rescue in Save the Dogs history. So some of these dogs were long-term shelter residents at Loving Hearts Shelter. Others were abandoned pets because of the war. Others were just street dogs that lacked socialization and were really traumatized by the war. So these dogs went through an incredible journey. I think it took maybe 10 or 12 hours stopping at so many military checkpoints in Ukraine where the vehicle was inspected. Then they got to the border crossing, and there were some complications with all the documents to import the dogs into Romania. But finally, they arrived at our shelter in the middle of the night, scared and confused. And our behavior specialist started working with them from the moment they arrived to try to identify behavioral problems, put the dogs into the right enclosures. We did thorough medical examinations of every dog as well as behavior assessments. And so most of these dogs are still with us. We've determined that 5 of them are very shy and at the moment are not ready for adoption. 6 of them are fearful of people, but our animal welfare staff and our behaviorists are working closely with them to socialize these dogs and regain their trust. Also, because these dogs hadn't received comprehensive medical care when they were in Ukraine, and some of them didn't receive vaccinations against common deadly canine diseases. So we provided blood tests, including SNAP tests. We vaccinated the dogs, sterilized the ones that hadn't been spayed or neutered, and we also microchipped all the dogs. So I'm happy to tell you that 5 of these 30 dogs have already successfully been adopted to homes in Sweden and Germany. Many others are on the path towards adoption. 7 of them are under treatment for heartworm disease, so they have to be kept here and kept quiet for some months, but then they'll be ready for adoption as well. So it's been a long process taking in these dogs, especially such a large number all at the same time. But overall, it's good to know that almost all of these dogs will be in adoptive homes, and the other ones can stay at our shelter for the rest of their lives. I'll share a couple stories of these dogs. This is Azia. So she traveled from Ukraine in a crate with another dog named Ren. Actually, this picture on the left shows the 2 of them at the border crossing between Ukraine and Romania in the middle of the night, sort of going through the veterinary inspection. And so based on the information that we got from the shelter in Ukraine, our staff thought that these 2 dogs that traveled together, Ozzy and Ren, were companions. And so when they got to our shelter, they put them in the same enclosures. And but Ozzy really never settled in. She was constantly fearful. Whenever people came nearby, she would hide in her doghouse in the back of her enclosure and stay there for hours. And we were trying to figure out how to help her. And we contacted the vet in Ukraine who had treated her when she was at the Loving Hearts shelter. And we learned that actually Azia wasn't friends with this other dog, Ren. There's a different dog that she was good friends with named Tiara, who was staying just a couple enclosures away. So we reunited Azia with her friend, and there was an immediate change in her personality. These dogs welcomed each other warmly, and because of this bond, now she's much more accepting of people. She doesn't feel like she needs to hide when people walk past the enclosure, and she just doesn't seem so alone or lost anymore. So she still has a long way to go towards being more socialized, but she's already doing so much better. I'll share one other story. This dog, Auror, who came, and actually he proved to be really well socialized. He could walk well on a leash. He was playing well with other dogs. And so he was one of the first dogs that we put up for adoption. And recently he traveled to Sweden, where now he's living a good life. So this is Auror with Roberta from our Welfare and Adoptions Department. And here he is in Sweden as a very, very happy and lucky dog. So, lessons learned. First I'll say, before this crisis, Save the Dogs had no budget for disasters. We had no staff dedicated to disaster response. So this was really a new experience for us. We made the decision really the day after I arrived in Romania to put forth a huge effort for the war in Ukraine. But we had a lot to learn. And I think it's very typical in disasters from my experience dealing with crises in other parts of the world, especially in the early days. It was really hard to get reliable information. A lot of the information that we received contradicted other information, or it was just speculation, or just completely inaccurate. And so that was really a challenge for us to try to make plans based on information that was incomplete at best or completely wrong at worst. Now we have reliable partners in Ukraine, and we have enough contacts that we can usually independently verify the information we get. If an organization contacts us and asks us for help, we can contact other people in that region and sort of do a background check and find out what they're really doing, what their needs are. So that's helped us to be a lot more effective. Also, the importance of establishing networks is I can't say enough about how critical that is. Ideally, forming networks with people with diverse expertise, sort of vets, shelter staff, other organizations, government officials, and ideally do this before the disaster starts. I mean, even though we're really close to the Ukrainian border, like so many other animal charities, we had very few connections in Ukraine before the crisis started. So, now we're collaborating with a lot of partners. Yeah, I mentioned, government officials, truck drivers, volunteers, Ukrainian volunteers from other countries. And so this has made us so much more effective. For example, the regulations for bringing supplies into Ukraine, I mean, in the first weeks of the war, they were changing almost every week, and it was really hard to understand what the regulations were. And so having connections with government officials who work at the border and drivers was really, really helpful for us to understand what documents are needed and, which border crossings are allowing humanitarian supplies. There were times where we'd send a driver to the border and they found out that week humanitarian supplies couldn't go through that border crossing. They would have to spend days going around and waiting in a queue. And so we've learned a lot about improving the information available to us. The continuing attacks on Ukrainian cities has been a constant challenge, of course. We feel like there's still too much risk for us to send our staff or volunteers to Ukraine. So we're working with partners based in the country, which again really underscores the importance of having reliable partners in the country instead of just trying to do it all from elsewhere. What else have we learned? When we're bringing those 30 dogs from Odessa, that was definitely a learning experience. They didn't have all of the necessary documents for importing them into the EU. Luckily, Save the Dogs has a lot of experience exporting dogs to other EU countries through our adoptions programs. So this knowledge of live animal imports and exports was really critical. And also, because we had people based at the border every day for months, we had good relationships with the border authorities. And so through those connections, we were able to collaborate with the border authorities and convince them that even though not all of the documents were exactly done properly, we convinced them to let us bring these dogs in anyway. Communication, of course, that's definitely been a challenge. Some of our partners in Ukraine don't have reliable internet or electricity. We use Google Translate a lot, especially for quick messages, but it's definitely not ideal for everything, including more complicated or nuanced communication. So, having partners who speak diverse languages is really helpful. The unpredictable nature of the war has made medium and long-term planning difficult. So it's been really important to be flexible. We have a lot of ideas for things we'd like to do in the future, but we need to be able to change direction. The war hasn't had any huge changes for some time, but who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And so we've learned we really need to have multiple plans and be ready to implement any of them at any time. And the logistics have been difficult of sending pet food and other supplies into Ukraine. Especially in the early days of the crisis, it was difficult for us to find drivers who would transport pet food because, as I said, most Ukrainian men aren't allowed to leave the country because of the draft. And most Romanian drivers didn't want to go into Ukraine because they felt it wasn't safe. And so it was, difficult to find drivers. In the beginning, we were doing things sort of piecemeal of, one person would drive supplies to our shelter, someone else would drive the supplies to the border, someone else would move them across the border, and then onward from there. And now we can just work with one driver with a big 18-wheeler truck who can bring things from Bucharest all the way to Odessa, and it's a lot more efficient. I mentioned the regulations also. That's been, again, we have better ways of doing things now, but in the early days, it was just we were getting calls in the middle of the night from drivers saying, I'm at the border right now, and they said, I don't have the right documents. Can you get me a signed letter from an NGO in Odessa? And so that was definitely a learning experience. But again, we've largely overcome that. So what are the current needs? Based on what we're seeing with our partners, that the most urgent need now is absolutely pet food. Although, hundreds and hundreds of tons of pet food have been donated, there are so many countless abandoned dogs and cats on the streets that that they're visibly becoming thinner, especially in the Kharkiv area. These two pictures are just examples of dogs that our partners are feeding, but there's just not enough food. So if we can get more donations of pet food, we can send more of it to Ukraine and help more animals survive the crisis. I'm truly worried that this will get worse, and it's possible that unthinkable numbers of dogs and cats could die of starvation. So although, as I said, we're currently focusing on keeping animals alive by donating pet food, but we're also committed to more sustainable solutions in the medium term and the long term. Our work in Ukraine doesn't have an end date. We're not just here while it's an emergency. I hope that we can continue to work there indefinitely and make this an ongoing program for Save the Dogs. And so, we'd like to partner with some of the shelters that we've been working with in Odessa, especially the ones that have proven to be transparent and effective and have, sound policies and procedures and help to build their capacity. One way to do this is by donating supplies. In addition to food, winter's not too far away, and so we just put in an order today to buy some plastic insulated dog houses that will help keep dogs in shelters warm for the winter. We want to send veterinary supplies. We just an hour ago we received a donation of a van full of flea and tick collars. So that will be amazing for preventing all the diseases that ticks spread and protecting the animals from fleas and ticks. Also, some of these shelters in Ukraine are not in good condition. The shelter that we rescued 30 dogs from still hasn't been rebuilt after the Russian attack that it suffered. Our closest partner, another shelter in Odessa, was damaged by a fire. Local farmers were burning trash, and this spread and ended up damaging parts of their shelter. And so we sent emergency funds for building dog houses to keep the dogs warm and dry. We sent funding for hay for horses and bedding for the dogs, but they still haven't properly rebuilt their damaged facilities. So we'd love to be able to do this. And ideally, not just help repair what was damaged, but also help these shelters work towards higher standards of care. For example, helping them to have better enclosures and more enrichment for the animals. Another need is training for the shelters. The main shelters that we're working with in Ukraine have told us that they would really benefit from training in best practices in animal care, shelter management, and similar topics. And so we'd love to be able to provide that for them. And of course, veterinary care. Out of all these abandoned pets, there's a real lack of access to basic veterinary treatment and vaccinations. And our partners, especially in the Odessa area, can identify animals that need veterinary care, but we need people to provide the care and funding for it. And so I think it would be amazing if, when it's determined safe enough to travel into the Odessa area, if a veterinary team could go there and work with local vets, bringing supplies, really collaborating and building capacity of the local vets there. And of course, sterilization. The huge number of abandoned pets has created a severe need for dog and cat population management. A lot of these animals in the streets haven't been spayed and neutered. A lot of them are giving birth, which is just swelling the already overwhelming population crisis. And tragically, especially as it's getting colder, these puppies and kittens that are born have very little chance of survival. And so we'd really, it's too big of a problem for Save the Dogs to address on our own, but we hope to coordinate with other organizations and strategically conduct a dog population management program to sustainably reduce these populations. And I know people in Odessa or people in Ukraine are already sterilizing dogs, but I'm sure what they're doing is not enough, and more support is needed to do this on a much larger scale. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's really been a pleasure to join you. Thanks.